My parents were married for 12 years, and while I was alive for that part of their marriage, when they were married, it was always like walking on eggshells. It just wasn't a super healthy marriage, and it was obvious. And Jack and I, that's my little brother, we had this thing called the honeycomb hideout in our house that my mom made for us. And it was like, this is going to sound really dramatic, but I promise it wasn't that bad. But it was a little closet that we had like junk food in and blankets and stuffies and a DVD player because we didn't have iPads back then. And Jack and I would go hide in the honeycomb hideout if mom and dad were fighting. So it was kind of, we were used to staying away when mom and dad were fighting. It just kind of was a part of our routine, and it seemed very normal. And then realizing what life was like post divorce, I had no idea what healthy looked like. So it was awesome when they got divorced.
Let me pause you for a second. How old were you when they got divorced,
Oh,
and what
yes.
was it like? How did they tell you? I'm curious about that from a kid's
Yeah.
perspective.
Great question. So I was 8 and Jack was 6. Um, that's when, so they told us when they separated. They didn't tell us when the divorce was like official. So they told us at the beginning of the separation process, which I thought was good. I thought it would be really weird if they separated and then waited to tell us till it was finalized. So I'm glad they told us when the separation began. But my mom actually sat us down when my dad already moved out, and we had no idea he already moved out. And she said, Dad doesn't live here anymore. He got an apartment in Denver, and we are separating and we're going through a divorce. And Jack said, Does that mean like you guys aren't married anymore? And she was like, Yeah, that's what that means. And I remember thinking to myself as an 8-year-old, like, wow, this is really sad and I need to be sad. But I didn't really get why it was sad because dad was gone for business trips anyways, and the house still felt so normal. And I just thought, like, he'll be back. And reality didn't hit until we went to dad's house for the first time. And it was like, oh, like we pack a bag and like we go to dad's house now. Like, what? So the reality of the divorce really set in when we started doing the back and forth thing. And then it was like, oh, okay, yeah, like dad's dating people. Mom took off her ring. Like, this is real.
Yeah, what was that like? As the dad, I moved out to an apartment as well. I don't. So your mom stayed in the house. What is that
Yep.
like for a kid when you're going to the apartment? Without all your stuff. As a dad, I could say I'm not the best at furnishing and making the house super kid friendly. What does a kid think when they're walking to dad's apartment and see this is their new home half the time?
Yeah, I talk about it in my book, and I try to say it in a really kind way because now I understand as an adult all that my dad had to go through. But back then, like, it was scary because I went from the comfortability of like the suburbs in my home to then this random, we called it the glass tower in Denver, where like literally his apartment was all glass. So like the walls were glass, like everything was glass. And then because he had to move out so quickly, all he could get was a 1 bedroom apartment. So he had his room, and then Jack and I built a fort on the ground in the living area on the floor. And so we didn't have beds yet. Like, we didn't have our own space. Jack and I like shared the living room floor together. And it sounds like very like, oh, so sad. But honestly, like, my dad made it fun by making it kind of like an adventure for us and being like, we're going to make a fort on the ground. And then we got to like have the TV in front of us and like, ooh, we get to watch TV as we fall asleep, which we never got to do before. And so like little privileges like that, and that made it kind of sound fun as a kid. But it definitely was intimidating. Like, even just, I talk about in the book, like the sounds of sirens going off because we're in the city. Like, I'm not used to that because I grew up in the suburbs. So then just hearing like the sounds of a city as you're falling asleep, like just the minor sensory changes even felt like a huge change to be a kid and be like, what is going on right now?
So what was that like when you went back to your mom's house? Was there a lot of talk about like what's going on at dad's, or was that kind of stuff you kind of kept to the other parent?
Yeah, I would say I wasn't really good at talking about it. And truthfully, like my parents going through the midst of all of the separation and trying to finalize the divorce, I don't remember them really being good at asking about it either. It was just kind of like, this is what we're doing and that's it. And there wasn't a whole lot of talk of like, how does this feel? Like, how are you guys adjusting? It was just like, here's what we're doing. And so it wasn't till years later that then we all finally started like looking back and reflecting and being like, wow, like that was hard and that was really interesting to manage. And I was really lucky to have my younger brother Jack because we really processed it together and we would really were the only ones who understood each other because he knew what it was like to go back and forth. So I always think divorce is a lot better if you have siblings with you. Because it was nice to lean on Jack and be like, don't you think that this is weird? And he's like, yeah. And then to think like, do you feel like you have to be a different person in front of dad than you do mom? And he's like, yeah. And so just the differences and I don't know, kind of managing these different personalities with both parents. And then, we got trapped in the trap that many kids of divorce fall into, which is like mom would say something about dad and then say, oh, don't tell your dad. And we'd be like, okay. And then dad would say something about mom and be like, don't tell your mom I said that. And we're like, okay. So then we're just storing all these secrets going back and forth. And it's like, oh, I can't say that. Oh my gosh, I don't want to bring that up. And there's just a lot of internal stress that goes on when you're a child of divorce that I think people don't really know about.
Co-parenting is a challenge under the best of circumstances. More than 1 million parents and family law professionals have trusted Our Family Wizard to successfully navigate the challenges of co-parenting. Choose Our Family Wizard and make co-parenting easier on your family.